Hey everyone, Rick here with the word for Wednesday. It was an interesting drive. I drive home from work and I was listening to a radio show that I rarely ever listen to it. And it was an interesting discussion that was going on because they were talking about the question that the radio host asked was who or what time frame would you want to live in if you didn't live in our current date age? So I thought that's kind of a good question. Yeah, and I was thinking through myself, because we've kind of all played with that thought sometime in our life, and it's like, yeah, one first guy comes out of the gate, who's the host, calls the host and says, "I think it would be great to live in the Wild West, the 1800s, westward expansion, just me and my horse, and I would just enjoy this whole." And then the guy was like, "Yeah, that'd be great, but I hope you're a good shot because you got to enforce your own law. And how about medicines? That's kind of a rough one. Tuberculosis was pretty bad during those days. There wasn't really a lot of good sanitary healthcare things going on. So, all right, so that one got scratched off the list. And then another guy comes up and goes, this one was great. He's like, the Middle Ages. I want to live in the Middle Ages, be a knight of the Round Table. And he's like going into great detail. And I'm like, oh, that's hilarious. A knight of the Round Table. It's like, yeah, those would have been great times. Bubonic plague. You get an abscess in your tooth and you're dead. That's not too bright. You got to have like 8 kids so that 4 of them survive, so that 3 of them can have kids. It was a terrible time to be alive. And then the last caller that I was listening to said, I would want to live from 1950 to 1975. And I was like, oh, sounds like good music. Cool cars. We had just enough technology, the guy says, to make life good and healthy enough, like vaccines and polio had been eradicated. So things like that could really help out life. And then he says that, it would just be a good time to be alive. And I got to thinking, yeah, but would you want to go back to the Cold War? Would you want to go back to the pollution that existed then? Would you want to go back to the pressure, the drop drills, the nuclear threats, all that stuff? Yeah, I don't know. I think the problem really comes down to this, is that we have nostalgic notions of our past. We think of the good old days, the glory days in high school sports, the good old days and hanging out with your friends, and don't realize the difficulty and the struggle that those days all brought. And we get just enchanted with the notions of what we were that always become bigger and better than the reality that existed. So the truth of the matter is that the more I think about my life, the more I think to myself, I'm going to take this day, but yet I always get tempted to look back. I don't know about you guys, but it's just a big temptation. How do we stay focused on the future and what is coming and focused on the now, and how do we improve and get ready for what God's going to do and enjoy God in the moment? Because there's nothing really in the past, but yet we always look back there. As we're coming out of the shelter in place and the restrictions that we've been living in for these last couple months, we got to look at things a little differently. We got to think things a little differently, because I think the temptation of looking back could really limit what we could become in the future. And that idea I just kind of want to lay before you with this kind of passage of scripture right now. And it's found in Genesis 19. If you got your Bible, you can take a peek. And it's basically the backstory to what we're going to read today is the idea that Abram and God were having a conversation about this little valley that had towns in it called Sodom and Gomorrah. And, there's things that come to mind of, oh yeah, instantly, well, they were this. They were everything. They were just a people that had completely gone hedonistic, and the appetites for sin and the appetite to be everything that God had not intended for them dominated everything they were. So the conversation over Sodom and Gomorrah starts with Abraham and God having a conversation about God saying, I'm going to destroy this town, but there's good people there. So Abraham says, well, what if I find 20 people that are good? What if I find 5 people? What if I find one person that's good? Okay, well, I won't I'll spare the city, but I'll give you time to get these people out. So he goes, he connects with his nephew Lot, and gets warned, and in this terrible scene, God sends angels down to destroy everything. And we're going to pick up the passage here in verse 23 of chapter 19. The sun had risen over the earth when Lot came to Zoar, and then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. He overthrew these cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of these cities and what grew on the ground. So picture the scene, the destruction as the family with Abraham is leaving Sodom and Gomorrah. But his wife, Lot's wife, came in from behind him and looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Now Abraham rose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah and towards the land in the valley and saw, and behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of a furnace. So Abraham's there seeing what is the wreckage of God's judgment. And the next thing you see that sticks out in the story is this woman looks back and becomes a pillar of salt. So I just kind of want to unpack this for you. The first question I would ask if I had her in front of me is like, what made you look back? If I had to do an interview, it would be this. What made you look back? What romantic notions of what you had made you look into that pre-existing space, those memories and those attachments that would make you risk your life? Because the agreement was to not look back. Don't look back at the judgment of what God has done in the past. Don't look back at these things of our past. And then instantly she turns into a pillar of salt. Man, that's a pretty interesting metaphor, because in our life, in our day-to-day life, when we look at the past and we look at the missed opportunities, when we look at moments of condemnation, when we look at nostalgic hope that isn't real hope, it makes us bitter. It makes us sour. It makes us acidic in our soul. We become a pillar of salt on the inside. And that event didn't go away. She was there as a statue for a couple generations afterwards. The salt of the Dead Sea accumulates around her body. Permanent Antiquities, chapters 11 and verse 4, Josephus writes that a pillar of salt remained until his day in the Roman Empire. And it was seen pretty, Clement of Rome, he describes that scene of a pillar of salt in his writing. And there's an idea that there's a memory and a monument that comes when we look back. When we look back at things in our past in desire and in longing to want what was back then to be true now, we're not leaning into the hope of today and the promise of a future. When we look back, we want what was, and we're not dealing with what is or what can be. And that leads to bitterness. It makes you salty. Salty souls tend to be people that have looked back and feel like they've been robbed of something, that they've missed out on something. And the truth of the matter is, you're losing a day that you could be leaning into the future of hope, developing a gift for a promise that God has for you. The more time we spend wrapped up in our past, the saltier we become. So I just want to leave you with that thought, something to think about. And hey, do yourself a favor. If you're really interested in kind of this whole passage, I would start at chapter 19 and just read it through. There's a ton of good stuff there that kind of unpacks the idea of looking what happens when we look forward in the storyline there. Because it's not just about desiring the sin of our past or the things that God dislikes. It's about missing the opportunity for a future and a hope. I hope you enjoy our word for Wednesdays. If you've got any more questions, go on our website. We've got study guides and things like that. We'd love to have you join us on Sunday. Take care. God bless you.